Are you tired of seeing this face? How about this one? And what about this one? Hey everyone, Frost here, and I want to discuss something that I find rather important. I've been seeing comments about people not wanting to see certain monsters return in future Monster Hunters. Normally, this wouldn't bother me at all. I have my own list of monsters I don't want to see again. No, what bothers me is the reasoning some people have for not wanting to see certain monsters return. They're tired of seeing the same monsters over and over again. They say that some monsters have simply been given too much spotlight and should take a seat for a game or two. Monsters like Rathalos, Nargakuga, Tigrex, Zenogur, and Kushala, to name a few, are generally the monsters pegged for being too prevalent in the series. Now, my initial reaction was, well, this is absurd. The way I see it, these monsters keep returning because they're simply good monsters that deserve to return. However, opinions aside, that did get me thinking. What if they have a point? What if there are certain monsters that have been in a lot of the games? Just how present are some of the monsters in the series? So, I did some researching to figure out which monster hunters that a number of monsters, along with other forms, have been included in. There are 16 monster hunters that I have included in this list. I chose to exclude the stories games, however, since as a spin-off of the series, they just don't carry the same weight as the mainline monster hunters. And, as for the monsters, I mostly look at the flagships, but look at some of the other more notable monsters throughout the series as well. Starting with the, quite literally, ever-present Rathalos. As the mascot of the entire series, it makes sense that Rathalos has been in every single monster hunter to date. But more than that, his subspecies Azure Rathalos has also been in a significant number of monster hunters. 10 out of 16 to be exact. And his rare species, Silver Rathalos, has been in 12 out of 16, which is crazy. He also has his deviant, Dread King, that was present in Generations and Generations Ultimate in place of his subspecies, as well as Apex Rathalos in Rise. Rathalos' counterpart, Rathian, is equally as prevalent as Rathalos is, with identical appearances in all games between all forms. Now, as incriminating as this is, I strongly believe that the Wraths deserve a pass. Not only are they the quintessential Monster Hunter monsters, as well as flagships of the series as a whole, but I mean, come on, they've been in every single Monster Hunter to date. It would be a monumental shame to break that streak. The next monster is the flagship of Monster Hunter DOS, Kushala Daora. Kushala has been in every Monster Hunter since his release, excluding the 3rd generation, and his variant, Rusted Kushala, was also present in the 2nd gen, but only ever made a reappearance in 4 Ultimate. Now, to look at Kushala by itself doesn't really tell the whole story. Kushala is one of 3 monsters that's a part of a well-known group of monsters, the Elder Trio. Kushala, along with Teostra and Chameleos, have been staple Elder Dragons in the series since their introduction in Generation 2. Teostra has also been present in every Monster Hunter with Kushala in it. However, Teostra's female counterpart, Lunastra, oddly hasn't, and has only appeared in Generation 2 and in World and Iceborne. Further, Chameleos shows up alongside Kushala and Teostra in every Monster Hunter, except for World and Iceborne, where he's oddly missing, but he made his triumphant return in Monster Hunter Rise. So, this would clearly indicate that, yeah, Kushala and Teostra in particular have been very present throughout the series. It's kind of strange how few games Lunastra shows up in, especially considering that she's the counterpart to a monster that has been so prevalent. And then there's Chameleos, who, while still being very present in the series, doesn't really feel like it since he wasn't in World and Iceborne. Of course, this is Chameleos, and he's in every Monster Hunter, even if you can't see him. Moving on then is Tigrex, the flagship of the next game in the series, Monster Hunter Freedom 2. Base Tigrex has only missed out on 3 games since his release, Tri, 3 Ultimate, and World, meaning he's been in 75% of Monster Hunters since his introduction. His subspecies, Brute Tigrex, has only been in 4 games, yet his appearances have been appreciably spread out. Then, there are his rare species and his deviant, which are Molten Tigrex and Grimclawed Tigrex, respectively. Both have only shown up in their respective 4th gen titles, making Generation 4 the prime time for Tigrex. So yeah, Tigrex has certainly had his fair share of appearances, and while I'm not the biggest fan of Tigrex, I gotta admit, I do want to see more Molten Tigrex in the future. Next up is Nargakuga, the flagship of Freedom Unite. Being introduced in Freedom Unite, Narga had the potential to show up in 11 total Monster Hunters, but is only present in 7 of them, missing out in Tri, 4, 4 Ultimate, and World. Making things more interesting, between a subspecies, rare species, and deviant, Nargakuga's alternate forms have collectively only shown up 5 times in Monster Hunters. His subspecies, Green Narga, was only in Portable 3rd and 3U. Lucent Nargakuga, his rare species, was only in 3 Ultimate, and his deviant, Silverwind, was in Gen and Gen Ultimate. Nargakuga's only real time to shine was in 3 Ultimate, and this surprised me. Nargakuga is one of the monsters that I've seen many claim is too prevalent in Monster Hunter. But if you ask me, based on this, Nargakuga actually needs more love, especially in Generation 5 when compared to his cousins, Tigrex, and the next monster I'm going to go over, Barrioth. Barrioth is the final monster of the famed trio of pseudo-wyverns. He was added in Generation 3, and has been in a surprisingly large number of titles for a non-flagship monster. His base form was present in all of Generation 3, as well as Gen Ultimate, Iceborne, and Rise. He also has a subspecies in Sand Barrioth that was in 2 games back in Gen 3, as well as a variant in Iceborne, Frostfang. So even though Barrioth hasn't been in as many games as Nargakuga has, in Generation 5 in particular, it feels like Barrioth and Tigrex have received a lot more love than Nargakuga has. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just something I really wanted to point out. I also find it kinda strange that Barrioth has been in so many Monster Hunters, but he kinda flew under the radar. Alright, next up is the flagship of Monster Hunter Tri, the best boy, Lagayachris, who has, largely been irrelevant since 3 Ultimate. Poor Laggy was introduced in Tri, wasn't even in the next Gen 3 game, and then got his time to shine in 3 Ultimate with his subspecies, Ivory Lagayachris, and his own rare species, Abyssal Lagayachris. But after that, well, he made it in Gen and Gen U, but that's it! Now, there was a Lagayachris prototype that was planned for Monster Hunter World, but it was ultimately scrapped due to technical reasons. It's sad, honestly. Lagayachris is my 3rd favorite monster, at least right now, and is just in general a really good monster. And I think that many would agree that out of all the flagships, Lagayachris definitely deserves more attention. And now for a fan favorite, the flagship of Portable 3rd, Zenogur, who has been in every Monster Hunter since his introduction, excluding World. His subspecies, Stygian Zenogur, has also been fairly prevalent, being included in 3 Ultimate, 4, 4 Ultimate, and Iceborne. There's also his deviant, Thunderlord Zenogur, that's in Generations and Generations Ultimate, as well as the discount Thunderlord in Rise, Apex Zenogur. So, yeah. I love Zenogur, but it's painfully clear that he has been very prevalent in the series. I can definitely see why some people may feel like they've seen enough of him. And now, for another one of my favorite monsters, next is Rockydios, who has also been fairly present in the series since he was added as a flagship of 3 Ultimate. Aside from 3U, he was in every Gen 4 game, as well as Iceborne. His variant, Raging Rockydios, has also been in every expansion since it was added in 4 Ultimate. So, I know there are many people who weren't terribly pleased with Bracky and Iceborne, and combined with being in every 4th Gen game, I can see why some might be sick of him by now. Man, Gen 3 has the best flagships in my opinion. Poor Gore. He's the flagship of Monster Hunter 4, and a monster that many hunters adore. Anyway, along with his adult counterpart, Shigaru Magala, Gore was in every Generation 4 Monster Hunter game, while his variant, Chaotic Gore Magala, was only present in the G-Rank expansions, and that's it. He hasn't been seen in any other Monster Hunters since. He wasn't even in any of the Stories games. And I think I'm speaking for a lot of people when I say that the Magalas are overdue for a reappearance. And with a dark-themed Sunbreak on the horizon, many of us have our hopes up that we'll be seeing him once again. There's also Surigios, who's pretty much in the same boat as the Magalas, although he was actually in the Stories games. He was the flagship of Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, and was also in Generations and Generations Ultimate. That's it. So yeah, again, much like the Magalas, although not nearly as popular, Surigios is another monster that many are looking forward to seeing again. One thing's for sure, you can't complain that we've seen too much of him. Moving on, the next monster is Glavinus, one of the 4 flagships of Monster Hunter Generations. Glavinus was naturally in Generations Ultimate, and while not in World, was brought back in Iceborne. And interestingly, he has never been without an alternate form. In Gen and Gen U, there was his deviant, Hellblade Glavinus, and in Iceborne, Glavinus came along with a new subspecies, Acidic Glavinus. So, Glavinus has had a fairly balanced amount of prevalence, all things considered, and I'm confident in saying that if Glavinus misses out in the next Mon Hunt or 2, it won't really feel like he's been forgotten. Mizutsune, another one of the flagships of Monster Hunter Generations, has also been fairly prevalent in the series since it was introduced. He was added in Gen, and reappeared in Gen Ultimate along with a brand new deviant form, Soulseer Mizutsune. Sadly, Mizutsune wasn't in World or Iceborne, but made his return in Rise, along with an Apex version of himself. So he is another monster that has been reasonably present in the series since he was added. Being in Rise, we already know that Mizu will be in Sunbreak. And who knows, maybe he'll get a subspecies in Sunbreak, like how Glavinus did in Iceborne. Naturally, the next 2 I'm going to take a look at are the rest of the Fated 4, Astalos and Gameth. Neither of them have been seen in mainline Monster Hunters since Generations Ultimate. Both monsters have had identical appearances too, being introduced in Generations, kept in Generations Ultimate, and receiving a deviant form in Generations Ultimate as well in Bolt Reaver for Astalos and Elderfrost for Gameth. Having seen both Glavinus in Iceborne and Mizutsune in Rise, there's a lot of questions whether or not we'll see either Astalos or Gameth make a return soon. A lot of us want to see them return. Next up is the flagship for Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate, Valstrax. He was added in Gen U, missed out on World and Iceborne, and was brought back in Rise, but solely as his variant, Crimson Glow Valstrax, which might as well just be a normal Valstrax. So, Valstrax's exclusion from World and Iceborne has definitely given him a more balanced presence. I don't think anyone's necessarily complaining that he's been in the games too much. Next up is Diablos, mostly because Bloodbath is actually considered a flagship of Gen Ultimate, even though I don't like to think he is. Anyway, get this, Diablos, a monster touted to be as iconic to Monster Hunter as Rathalos is, actually hasn't been in every Monster Hunter. Base Diablos has been in every Monster Hunter except for 2, Monster Hunter 4 and Monster Hunter Generations. And a subspecies, Black Diablos, has been in a majority of Monster Hunters, a total of 10 out of 15 since its introduction in Monster Hunter G. Beyond those 2, there's Bloodbath Diablos in Gen Ultimate and Apex Diablos in Rise. Adding to this, there's another monster closely related to Diablos that's also worth mentioning, Monablos. Monablos was in every Generation 1 and 2 Monster Hunter, and his subspecies White Monablos was also in every Gen 1-2 game, except for the very first one. But outside of that, both were only ever seen again in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. So yeah, Diablos has been incredibly present in the series. It's kind of a shame that he's not been in every game, sadly, but it is what it is. Anyway, I completely get why some hunters might be sick of seeing Diablos by now, especially since Monablos hasn't been seen in so long. Now, for the sake of going over all the flagships, I'll talk about the flagship monsters in Generation 5. World's flagship is Nargakuga, and he was in both World and Iceborne. He got a variant in Iceborne too, Ruiner Nargakuga. Iceborne's flagship is Velkhana, and Rise's flagship is Magnamalo, and as it stands, both are only in their respective mainline games. So yeah, no one can reasonably say that these monsters have shown up too much yet. I mean, it's been like 1 game each. And there we go. While I don't think this should be used as an argument for or against certain monsters, I do think it's important to at least realize how much presence certain monsters have across the series. And with a huge Sunbreak announcement coming soon, there's a lot of anticipation building as to which monsters we'll get to see make a return in Sunbreak. I'm so much looking forward to it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and those grids too, I loved making them. And thanks for sticking around this long, really appreciate it. Be cool, stay frosty.